Robert Baratheon wanted to be king. After leading the rebellion that toppled the Mad King's reign, he stood victorious but burdened by uncertainty. He had lost Lyanna Stark, the woman he loved, and the war had cost him friends. When the time came for him to claim the Iron Throne, he refused. He would not accept the crown, for it was as heavy as the guilt he carried. Instead, he declared that he would return to Storm's End and rule only his ancestral seat, leaving the Seven Kingdoms to choose their own ruler. Some called him wise, others a coward. Eddard Stark, still mourning the loss of his sister, stood beside Robert in the throne room at the moment of refusal. The lords assembled gasped, uncertain how to respond. Some pressed him to reconsider, but Robert merely shook his head, weariness etched across his scarred face. Ned felt relief that his friend would not shoulder the burdens of kingship, yet apprehension gnawed at him over what would come next. The realm needed stability, and many believed Robert was the only man who could unite the kingdoms after such bloodshed. Ned watched in silence, sensing the shape of future conflicts forming. Jon Arryn, the man who had guided Robert and Ned through the rebellion, stepped forward with calm authority. He urged the lords to respect Robert's decision, reminding them that the rebellion had been fought to end tyranny, not replace one tyrant with another. When whispers rose about who would sit the throne, Jon merely suggested patience. The Targaryen heir, Viserys, was exiled across the narrow sea, a boy with no means to claim his heritage. Some murmured support for Stannis Baratheon, Robert's stern younger brother. Others looked to the might of House Lannister, whose wealth could sway any uncertain faction. Robert departed King's Landing that same day, riding out with only a small escort. He left behind the broken remains of House Targaryen's banners and the echoes of war cries that still lingered in the scorched streets. The city's common folk barely noticed his departure, preoccupied with rebuilding their lives and mourning their dead. He was not their king, and they had no reason to hail him as such. But he carried a lingering guilt, a sense that he had left the realm leaderless. Storm's End awaited him, a battered stronghold once besieged but never conquered. That would be home. As news spread of Robert's refusal, chaos rippled through the Seven Kingdoms. Each great house weighed its options, unsure who might claim the Iron Throne next. In the north, the lords looked to Eddard Stark, though he dismissed any notion of kingship, preferring to return to Winterfell. The Vale's loyalty lay with Jon Arryn, whose influence had grown in the aftermath of the war. In the Reach, Mace Tyrell's ambitions rose like an early morning sun, while Dorne still smoldered with resentment over Elia Martell's death. Everywhere, alliances were tested, and the scars of the rebellion were still fresh. In the days that followed, ravens flew from the Red Keep in every direction. Some letters bore the seal of the hand of the king, though no hand existed at present. Others carried urgent messages from lords seeking to sway allies or placate rivals. The streets of King's Landing teemed with rumor. One day, it was said that Stannis Baratheon would accept the crown if offered. Another day, talk spread that Tywin Lannister had arrived with a host of knights, eager to press his advantage. Yet amid the confusion, the Iron Throne itself remained empty, a symbol of shifting power. While lords and ladies schemed, Robert rode south under gray skies. He recalled the siege of Storm's End, where Stannis had held the castle through starvation. Stories of rats and boiled leather dinners haunted Robert's memory, a reminder of how close defeat had come. Yet Stannis had endured, forging a legend of duty and determination. Thoughts of his brother brought mixed feelings. Stannis was honorable and stubborn, but would he truly crave the Iron Throne? Robert couldn't guess. All he knew was that Storm's End was his true home, and he longed for its sturdy walls and the salt breeze. As he neared his fortress, Robert noticed the familiar silhouette of Storm's End rising from the rocky coastline. Memories overwhelmed him. His childhood laughter echoing in the halls, the proud face of his father offering a guiding hand, the day he and Stannis parted ways when the rebellion began. Those recollections warred with the fresh wounds of battle and betrayal. The gates opened to welcome him, and a handful of retainers bowed low. They seemed as uncertain as the lords in King's Landing, unsure whether to call him lord or something grander. Robert offered only a nod and a smile. He dismounted, eyes scanning the courtyard. Weather-worn banners bearing the crowned stag emblem hung from the ramparts. The wind-off shipbreaker bay howled, carrying the taste of brine. Within, the walls felt both comforting and suffocating. He was home, yet the weight of decisions made and unmade pressed upon him. A steward approached to welcome him back, addressing him as Lord Baratheon. Robert's face twitched at the title, but he accepted it. Past the gates, past the courtyard, he made his way inside, searching for the warmth of the great hall and a distant hope for some kind of peace. The great hall echoed with the footsteps of a lord who had once been a warrior. Torches flickered against stone walls, illuminating the battered tapestries that told tales of old conquests. Memories of feasting and laughter warred with the ghosts of half-remembered nights. Servants bustled about, preparing a meal worthy of his return, but he barely noticed. His thoughts drifted to the lines of succession, the vacuum left by his refusal. Would the realm descend into chaos? He pushed the concern aside, telling himself it was no longer his burden. He would defend the Stormlands and nothing more. Late that night, after a quiet supper, Robert found himself alone on the ramparts. Wind lashed at his face, whipping his hair around. He stared out into the endless darkness of the sea. The solitude of Storm's End was both comforting and isolating. He could almost pretend he had never left, that the battlefields and betrayals belonged to someone else's life. Yet the occasional pang in his side, the scars on his arms, and the nightmares that still visited him reminded him of the cost. If he had claimed the throne, would Lyanna's memory have been dishonored? He couldn't say. In King's Landing, a power struggle began to take shape. With no king to lead, lords and would-be regents jockeyed for position. The small council was effectively disbanded, leaving advisors and ambitious courtiers to fill the void. Tywin Lannister, head of the wealthiest house in Westeros, arrived in the capital with a grand retinue. He set his lion sigils everywhere, as though reminding all that a new order might be at hand. Some whispered that he intended to marry his daughter Cersei to whoever emerged as king, ensuring a place near the seat of power. Others believed he craved the throne himself. Jon Arryn tried to maintain a semblance of order, reminding the gathered lords that the war had only just ended and the kingdom needed unity, not another clash. Yet Mace Tyrell flexed his influence, offering alliances through marriage and trade, and the lords of the Reach carried significant weight in feeding the realm. Meanwhile, Prince Doran Martell Dorne showed no interest in elevating himself but demanded recognition and reparations for the deaths of Elia and her children. The Martells harbored a quiet rage, and the rest of the realm remained wary of awakening a fresh wave of Dornish vengeance. Stannis Baratheon, stationed at Dragonstone, received word of his brother's unprecedented decision. Cold fury simmered beneath his stern exterior. If Robert would not be king, did that duty fall to him? Duty mattered above all else to Stannis, and the idea of forsaking responsibility bristled against his sense of honor. Yet he did not march on King's Landing. Instead, he dispatched ravens, seeking counsel from those he trusted. Part of him resented Robert's abdication. Another part wondered if he should claim the throne by right of being the elder living Baratheon in line once Robert had stepped aside. Silence plagued him. In the north, Ned Stark was granted a warm welcome on his return. Winterfell's towering walls offered a sense of security, but Ned knew that winter always came. Grief weighed heavily upon him. Lyanna's tomb in the crypt reminded him of broken promises, though he kept that sorrow private. Catelyn Tully, his new wife, tried to comfort him. They had married quickly, a matter of alliance between houses Tully and Stark during the tumult of the rebellion. Their union was still fragile, yet it provided a small measure of hope. For Ned, leading the North was paramount. The Iron Throne was not his concern. Months passed, and chaos brewed quietly across the land. With no official king, various factions emerged, each believing they had the strongest claim. Some proclaimed that the throne rightfully belonged to the unborn child of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, if that child had survived, but everyone knew those rumors were baseless. Others rallied around Stannis, who had the best legal claim among the Baratheons. A few even whispered that the Targaryens might find allies across the sea and return. Through it all, Robert remained at Storm's End, seemingly uninterested in the swirl of crowns and swords. On a harsh winter morning, a raven arrived at Storm's End with news that a council of lords would convene in King's Landing, an attempt to resolve the crisis of succession. Robert did not intend to go. He refused to entangle himself in a political arena that he despised. Yet word came that Eddard Stark, Jon Arryn, and others he respected would attend, trying to prevent civil war. Torn between his vow to stay away and his lingering sense of responsibility, Robert wrestled with himself. Ultimately, old loyalties compelled him, and he decided to ride once more to the capital. He set out with a smaller group than before, no fanfare heralding his journey. The roads proved treacherous, with remnants of bandit groups and disgruntled soldiers who had fought in the war and now found themselves masterless. Robert did not turn a blind eye. When brigands attacked a village along the way, he and his men intervened. The villagers recognized him as the hero of the Trident, but he shrugged off their praise. He had spilled blood and lost friends. If this was heroism, it tasted bitter on his tongue. One night, he dreamed of Lyanna begging him for something he could not give. The city of King's Landing looked different upon his second arrival. New construction mixed with the wreckage of war. The Red Keep stood as imposing as ever, though the Targaryen dragon skulls that once filled its corridors had been removed or destroyed by vengeful soldiers. The aura of uncertainty weighed heavily. Rumors spread that Tywin Lannister had seized parts of the palace, installing his own guards. Mace Tyrell's envoys roamed the city, offering gold and grain for political favors. Smaller houses, desperate to secure their futures, clustered around whichever lord promised them the most stability. The capital teemed with cunning tongues. Robert found Jon Arryn, older and more burdened, waiting in one of the lesser halls with Eddard Stark. They exchanged solemn greetings. Jon explained that the meeting would be an assembly of major lords to discuss and vote, if necessary, on the matter of succession. He believed that only a unified front could stop the realm from slipping into another war. Ned expressed quiet relief that Robert had come, believing his presence might temper the more volatile lords. Robert laughed without humor, saying he wanted no part in wearing a crown. Still, his very name carried weight and all knew it. The assembly took place in the throne room, the Iron Throne looming behind the gathered lords like a silent threat. Tywin Lannister stood to one side, dressed in finery of crimson and gold, a retinue of Lannister knights arrayed behind him. Mace Tyrell was on the opposite side, flanked by sons and bannermen. Other lords took their places, each wearing the colors and sigils of their houses. Stannis arrived late, standing stiff and formal, his jaw set in grim determination. Jon Arryn stepped forward to open the talks, urging unity and collaboration. Tension hung thick in the air, as though one spark would set everything ablaze. Tywin spoke first, calling attention to the fractured state of the realm and offering a solution. The throne must go to one strong enough to maintain peace. He argued that chaos would reign if the seat remained empty. Mace Tyrell countered that stability could be found in a king who could feed the nation, hinting at the Reach's abundant harvests. Stannis, in his stern voice, reminded them that by all legal and traditional accounts, Robert was the rightful heir after the Mad King's line was extinguished, and with Robert's refusal, the crown logically should pass to him. Unease spread through the chamber. Robert interrupted, his voice echoing across the hall. He declared he had no interest in the throne. The crown, he said, belonged to someone with the desire and the temperament to rule justly. He promised that House Baratheon of Storm's End would support whoever was chosen lawfully, but he would not be king. Tywin raised a skeptical brow. Mace Tyrell tried to glean advantage from Robert's dismissal, suggesting a new union between the Tyrells and Baratheons if only Robert would lend his name to Tyrell's prospective claim. Robert scoffed at the notion, disclaiming any alliance that involved trickery or forced marriage. Stannis watched his brother with cool eyes. He asked why Robert insisted on rejecting the position for which they had fought. Did he not owe it to the men who died under his banner to guide the realm toward stability? Robert, anger flaring, retorted that he owed them a life free from the burdens of the throne. He would protect the Stormlands, he would fight if the realm were threatened, but he would not place himself upon that abominable seat. Silence followed, broken by the shifting of armor and hushed murmurs. Jon Arryn, seeking to avert calamity, proposed that lords present nominate one among them to be king. The suggestion ignited further discord. Mace Tyrell pressed his claim, boasting of the Reach's strength and prosperity. Tywin subtly hinted that his grandson, once one was born, might inherit, if only a suitable match were found. Some lesser lords, desperate for peace, leaned toward Stannis as the rightful Baratheon to succeed where Robert refused. The Martell representatives remained quiet, watchful, taking note of every shifting alliance. Meanwhile, the Iron Throne loomed. Hours dragged by, voices growing hoarse, yet no consensus emerged. Ned Stark maintained a stoic presence, occasionally glancing toward Robert, who was as restless as a caged beast. That evening, the session concluded inconclusively, leaving the question of the crown unresolved. Lords withdrew to their respective camps or the manors they occupied in the city. Robert retreated to an old barracks where he had once stayed during the rebellion. Jon Arryn joined him, the two men sharing a flagon of wine. Jon pleaded for Robert to reconsider. The realm needed a Baratheon to finalize what had begun. Robert's face grew dark. He spoke of losing Lyanna, of the horrors he had witnessed, of the endless politics that disgusted him. Then he said quietly that he would rather die than become another Mad King. Jon sighed and changed tactic, proposing at least that Robert endorse Stannis openly, so the realm might unite behind one name. Robert hesitated, torn between loyalty to his brother and his own reservations about Stannis's severe nature. Ultimately, he agreed on the condition that Stannis's rule must be tempered by wise counsel, meaning Jon Arryn, Ned Stark, and others of unblemished reputation. With that, Robert half-heartedly promised to stand before the assembly the next day and back Stannis as the rightful heir. Jon Arryn seemed relieved, hopeful that the matter might end without more bloodshed. Morning came, and the lords returned to the throne room. Robert stood in the center, arms crossed, as Stannis remained somewhat apart. Tywin Lannister's keen eyes darted between them, while Mace Tyrell wore a faint, knowing smile. Before the assembly, Robert declared that he endorsed Stannis Baratheon to claim the Iron Throne, as the next in line after his own refusal. He added a stern warning that House Baratheon of Storm's End would defend that claim against any who sought to usurp it. A hush fell. Some found relief in this new clarity. Others whispered that Stannis was too unyielding. Mace Tyrell, unwilling to cede his aspirations, stepped forward. With deliberate elegance, he proposed a marriage alliance. His daughter to Stannis, sealing a bond that would unite the Reach and the Stormlands. Stannis's face revealed little, but a flicker of surprise crossed his features. Murmurs fluttered across the chamber. Marriage alliances were the mortar that held Westeros together, yet Stannis had never been known for romance or easy compromise. After a moment's pause, he stated that any such union would require time and consultation, that he would not be pressured into something so critical on the spot. Mace Tyrell bowed with a gracious smile. Tywin Lannister spoke up next, claiming that House Lannister had contributed significantly to the rebellion's final victory by capturing King's Landing. He asserted that the Lannisters' support should not be dismissed. Indeed, some recalled how the Lannisters had arrived at the city's gates late in the war, sacking the capital in a sudden display of opportunism. Tywin's cold green eyes flickered with intensity. He proposed that his daughter Cersei be considered for Stannis, or that a Lannister match be made in the future, ensuring the realm's wealth was harnessed for reconstruction. Stannis offered a polite but lukewarm response, and the tension climbed. Doran Martell's envoy then rose to speak on behalf of House Martell. Measured in tone, the envoy acknowledged the tragedy that had befallen Elia Martell, expressing lingering bitterness over the brutal circumstances of her death and the death of her children. If Stannis Baratheon took the throne, House Martell demanded assurance that those responsible would be punished, or at least disgraced. Whispers of the mountain's atrocities coursed through the hall. Stannis listened gravely, giving a nod of acknowledgement, vowing to serve justice where it was due, though he made no direct accusations. The envoy's expression remained impassive, unconvinced but willing to see how events unfolded. Jon Arryn, taking a central position, proposed that a coronation for Stannis be planned, pending official acceptance by the majority of the realm's great houses. In principle, many seemed to agree, but the details bristled with complications. Who would serve as hand, who would lead the Kingsguard, which houses would be honored or appeased? All these questions flickered in the torchlight of the throne room, threatening to ignite fresh hostilities. Robert eyed the Iron Throne one last time and felt nothing but revulsion. Yet a faint hope sparked in him that if Stannis governed with fairness, perhaps the realm could recover. The next weeks saw a flurry of negotiations in King's Landing. Stannis, stoic and methodical, examined every alliance and potential marriage with the diligence of a man who believed in the letter of the law. He consulted Ned Stark and Jon Arryn frequently, less so Robert, who attended discussions sporadically before returning to Storm's End. Tywin Lannister, unwilling to lose out, used his fortune to lavish gifts upon potential allies. Mace Tyrell did the same, but with more emphasis on the promise of bountiful harvests. Doran Martell's representatives kept watch, occasionally pressing for retribution against those who had wronged Elia. Robert found himself restless at Storm's End, uncertain if he had done right by endorsing Stannis. Yet what alternative existed? He had no desire to rule, nor did he think others better suited than his brother, despite their differences. He busied himself by touring the Stormlands, ensuring that reconstruction efforts after the war were underway. Fields needed replanting, roads needed repairs. The people there looked to him for leadership, not for a crown. He hunted, drank, and sometimes paused in lonely moments to remember Lyanna. The Stormlands lords rallied to his presence, but he deflected their pleas to claim the throne. Stannis' official coronation was set for the dawn of a new moon, an event that drew lords and ladies from every corner of Westeros. The Red Keep was cleaned, tapestries replaced, and thousands of candles lit the Great September for the solemn ceremony. The Faith of the Seven oversaw the rites, as was tradition. Stannis' jaw was tight when the crown was placed upon his head. A simple circlet of black iron adorned with stag antlers, forged anew for the occasion. Applause was measured, not thunderous, for many still held reservations. Yet it signaled an end to the power vacuum. Robert stood at the sidelines, feeling more like a ghost than a hero. As the High Septon declared Stannis king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, Robert sensed a jarring finality. The brother he had once teased mercilessly, the man who had starved at Storm's End, now wore the crown Robert had cast aside. A hush of tension filled the sept, followed by low murmurs of approval. At the moment the ceremony ended, the chords of a solemn hymn echoed, and Robert slipped out, unnoticed by most. The celebrations that followed took on a subdued flavor. King Stannis was not one to feast in indulgence or bathe in revelry. A modest banquet was arranged, but his new court seemed ill at ease. Tywin Lannister observed with calculating eyes, Mace Tyrell tried to inspire a more festive tone, and the Martell envoys accepted courtesy but pressed quietly for justice. Eddard Stark spoke little, his own burdens unspoken. Jon Arryn did his best to ease tensions, orchestrating careful seating arrangements. Robert's presence was fleeting. He left early, riding back to Storm's End under a canopy of stars. That night, King Stannis confronted the first crisis of his reign. Rumors of a Targaryen plot brewing across the sea. Whispers circulated that Viserys Targaryen was courting the favor of Illyrio Mopatis in Pentos, collecting funds and mercenaries to invade Westeros. Stannis, lacking Robert's famed skill at forging alliances through personal charisma, found himself reliant on Jon Arryn's counsel. To neutralize the Targaryen threat, the new king considered sending assassins or hiring sellswords to preemptively strike. But such methods unnerved even his advisors, who remembered the madness that had brought about the prior regime's downfall. The Iron Throne exacted harsh demands. In the weeks and months after the coronation, unrest simmered. Not all houses recognized Stannis's rule instantly. Some in the Westerlands and the Reach considered him too rigid. The Dornish lords awaited a gesture of reparation or punishment for Gregor Clegane. Throughout the Riverlands, smaller lords who had lost much in the rebellion wondered if the new king would reimburse them or simply demand more taxes. Meanwhile, the small folk, weary of war, prayed for an end to the strife. King Stannis began issuing decrees to restore roads, rebuild ravaged towns, and punish corrupt officials. Yet he struggled to inspire loyalty. Robert found relative peace in overseeing the Stormlands. He organized fishing communities, helped fortify coastal defenses, and, in quieter moments, hunted in the rain-lashed forests. Sometimes he considered visiting King's Landing, but the memory of the Iron Throne's cold edges and the clamor of ambition repelled him. Instead, he exchanged letters with Jon Arryn, who reported both progress and setbacks under Stannis's reign. The younger Baratheon's word was law, yet he had few friends to enforce it willingly. Tyrants ruled through fear, but Stannis sought to govern by duty and justice. Some found him too harsh, others too unyielding. When Ned Stark traveled south again to discuss the realm's security, he stopped at Storm's End to see Robert. They embraced, recalling the camaraderie that had once led them through battle. Over shared cups of ale, Ned confessed concerns about King Stannis's approach. Justice was paramount, but the realm required a certain softness in dealing with old wounds. Robert snorted, claiming that softness had never been Stannis's way. He asked Ned if the realm would be better off had he taken the throne. Ned hesitated, then shook his head, saying Robert's heart was never in it. Better a reluctant king than a resentful one, he said, though he was unsure which scenario they had actually inherited. Word soon arrived that Tywin Lannister was displeased with certain royal decrees demanding stricter regulation of trade routes. The Lannisters, flush with gold from the mines of the Westerlands, felt no obligation to bow to edicts that cut into their profits. Tension flared, and rumors abounded that Tywin might withhold his levies should war erupt elsewhere. Mace Tyrell, always eager to expand influence, saw an opening to move closer to the throne, offering grain shipments in exchange for royal favor. King Stannis, however, refused to dispense empty titles or grant privileges that undermined what he considered lawful equity. Conflict loomed. The first open test of King Stannis's rule came when a minor lord in the Crownlands declared that he would pay homage to no king until his lands were restored. Bandits had ravaged his fields during the war, and he blamed the crown for failing to protect them. Stannis sent a small force to enforce loyalty, but it escalated into bloodshed when rebellious peasants ambushed the king's men. The rebellion was quashed swiftly, yet the brutality left a sour taste in the mouths of many who heard the tales. Such was the cost of imposing order, especially with a ruler who believed in absolute obedience to royal authority. In the Red Keep, courtiers whispered that the king lacked Robert's personal charm and might never be truly loved by the people. They gossiped about how the Storm Lord had turned his back on the crown, leaving his brother to shoulder a burden that would slowly crush him. Some even suggested that Robert might one day be forced to claim the throne if Stannis's reign faltered. Those rumors reached Robert's ears, but he ignored them. He had made his choice, and if the realm tore itself apart, that was not on him. Or so he tried to convince himself. Meanwhile, across the sea, Viserys Targaryen, still alive and plotting, gathered exiled lords and knights who yearned for the restoration of the dragon banners. In taverns and secluded enclaves of the free cities, whispers spoke of a golden-haired sister said to be of marriageable age, someone who might be wed to a powerful warlord or called to secure an army. The Targaryen threat, once faint, began to grow like a shadow. Illyrio Mopatis entertained these exiles, seeing potential profit. Yet for now, it was all talk, ships on the horizon that never quite landed on Westerosi shores. Jon Arryn's health began to fail. The older man who had once protected Robert and Ned as foster sons found the responsibilities of regency and council weighing him down. Each day, he met with King Stannis in the Solar, advising him on matters of diplomacy and law. But the weariness in his eyes did not fade, and he took to drinking poppy milk at night to ease pains in his chest. Ned Stark visited as often as he could, attempting to help Jon manage the fractious court. Still, with every passing week, the old falcon's wings seemed closer to folding. A year into Stannis' reign, it became clear that war had not entirely ceased. Skirmishes along the borders, disputes over banditry, and the hostility of certain powerful lords threatened the fragile peace. Tywin Lannister refused to send promised levies to help secure the crownlands from raiders, insisting that any problem near King's Landing was the king's alone to handle. Mace Tyrell demanded special rights to collect taxes from a disputed territory near Blackwater Rush. Even the Ironborn tested the new king's resolve by raiding along the coast. Stannis' responses were swift and often severe, earning him both grudging respect and deep resentment. Robert occasionally heard these tidings and felt pangs of guilt, but they were quickly quelled by his belief that he had done enough. He had won the war to rid the realm of the Mad King, and that was the end of it. He told himself that, if the realm wanted a king, they had one in Stannis. The more distance he put between himself and King's Landing, the easier it became to ignore the clarion calls of politics. Storm's End was his, and here he had a measure of control. He hunted stags in the forest, drank with old friends, and tried to forget the ghosts of the past. When news arrived that Jon Arryn had died in his sleep, Robert felt a sharp pang of loss. The father figure who had once shielded him and Ned was gone. He rode to King's Landing for the funeral, paying homage to the man who had orchestrated the rebellion's success as much as any warrior. The capital seemed even more tense now. Lannister soldiers patrolled certain districts, Tyrell bannermen lingered around the markets, and the gold cloaks looked thinly stretched. Stannis wore black, receiving condolences with a stiff nod. Robert's presence at the funeral stirred fresh rumors that he might finally take up the throne. He ignored them, focusing on the casket bearing Jon Arryn's remains. After the funeral rites, Ned Stark discreetly asked for Robert's help in advising Stannis, for the new king seemed adrift without Jon's guidance. Robert grimaced, claiming he had no taste for more politics. Ned pressed him, saying that unless Robert supported his brother actively, Tywin Lannister or Mace Tyrell might carve out influence that left the throne vulnerable. Robert responded with a tired shrug, half-heartedly agreeing to lend advice. But each moment in the Red Keep set his teeth on edge, and as soon as he could, he retreated to the comfort of Storm's End. The realm endured. Stannis issued edicts, replaced disloyal crown officers, and tried to enforce justice. Yet his popularity did not grow. Noble houses muttered that he was too cold, too rigid. The small folk, while not openly defiant, found him distant. Some praised him for punishing corrupt lords and reeves, but fear mingled with respect. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister brokered clandestine agreements, securing trade deals in Essos and quietly negotiating marriages that would bind key houses to him. Mace Tyrell advanced his own agenda, pushing for his children to be placed in positions of influence. The Martells bided their time, ever watchful. War nearly broke out when a Lannister retainer trespassed on lands claimed by House Tyrell, and blood was shed in a brief skirmish. King Stannis, unwilling to let the great houses butcher each other, intervened by dispatching a royal envoy. Tywin refused to submit to what he considered an overreach of authority, but cooler heads eventually prevailed, stopping the conflict from escalating. Still, the underlying tension persisted like a tinderbox waiting for spark. Some in the court whispered that if Robert Baratheon had been king, no one would dare defy the crown for fear of his wrath or his renowned hammer. Over time, Robert's name turned into a legend of what might have been. The gallant warrior who had slain Prince Rhaegar at the Trident, the jovial and larger-than-life commander who inspired men to follow him into the jaws of death. He was a living myth, absent from the throne he had won. In taverns, minstrels sang ballads of the rebellion, lauding Robert's victory while lamenting his refusal to wear the crown. Some nights, Robert would drink too much and hear those songs in his mind, haunted by the path he did not take and by the woman he could not save. One evening, word reached Storm's End that a fleet of raiders, perhaps Ironborn or perhaps Selsales funded by Tywin Lannister, rumors varied, was attacking the coastline near Tarth. Furious, Robert mobilized his knights and bannermen, riding to the coast to repel the threat. They clashed with the invaders in a series of brutal skirmishes. Robert led from the front, his warhammer crushing shields and skulls alike. It was as though the old days of the rebellion had returned, and a grim satisfaction filled him as he fought. They drove the raiders back to their ships, but the cost was heavy in blood. In the aftermath, some of the local lords urged Robert to impose steeper taxes and build a larger fleet to protect their shores. He agreed, seeing the necessity. Reports trickled in that the attack might have been quietly supported by parties in King's Landing who sought to weaken the Stormlands. Robert's face darkened. Had Stannis allowed such a thing, or had the king simply lacked the power to prevent it? Bitter suspicion grew. For the first time, Robert felt an inkling of doubt. Perhaps his refusal of the throne had condemned the realm to a slow decline. He traveled to King's Landing to demand answers, ignoring protocol. Arriving at the Red Keep unannounced, he barged into the Royal Solar, where King Stannis conferred with several counselors. Robert demanded to know if the crown had any hand in the raids. Offended by the implication, Stannis bristled, proclaiming he would never conspire against his own bannermen. Robert pressed for an investigation. Stannis agreed but insisted that he needed proof before taking action against any great house, even the Lannisters. Robert stormed out, anger burning in his veins. Tywin Lannister merely watched from afar, impassive, as though daring anyone to accuse him directly. Tensions escalated when roving Sellswords appeared on roads leading into the Stormlands, harassing travelers and exacting tolls. Robert led more sorties to clear them out, but the pattern repeated. As soon as one band was destroyed, another rose elsewhere. Local rumor pinned the blame on Lannister gold or on Tyrell cunning, but no evidence surfaced. To Robert's frustration, King Stannis did not deploy the royal army to help, claiming the Crownlands needed protection from increasing bandit raids. Letters of appeal from Storm's End went unanswered. A rift formed between the Baratheon brothers, one that threatened to deepen into open hostility. Meanwhile, in the distant east, Viserys Targaryen secured a tentative alliance with a powerful Khalasar, betting his sister's hand in marriage as the price for an army. Merchant ships carried word of this strange union back to Westeros. Stannis took it seriously, quietly commissioning additional warships to guard the Narrow Sea. He commanded lords from the Vale and the Reach to assist, but Mace Tyrell and others delayed, reluctant to fund a royal fleet while their own interests remained vulnerable. Tywin Lannister coldly refused to contribute any ships at all, citing a vital need in the Westerlands. Stannis ground his teeth and continued alone. Within King's Landing, the small folk began to feel the pressures of erratic trade and uncertain leadership. Bread prices rose, and rumors of Targaryen dragons returning caused fearful speculation. The city guard found themselves overworked, trying to maintain order in crowded streets. Sympathizers of the Targaryens scrawled dragon graffiti on walls at night. Lannister men-at-arms clashed with rowdy locals in taverns, each incident inflaming more resentment. An undercurrent of dissatisfaction with King Stannis took hold among the less educated populace, who remembered Robert's rebellion as a heroic cause that promised a freer realm. Some questioned whether that promise had been abandoned. Occasionally, Ned Stark visited Storm's End, urging Robert to offer the king some measure of reconciliation. Robert scoffed, but he still respected Ned enough to listen. Over cups of ale, Ned explained that the realm needed unity with enemies looming. The Targaryens, the Ironborn, and the possible ambition of houses like Lannister and Tyrell threatened the fragile peace. Reluctantly, Robert composed a letter swearing fealty to King Stannis and offering knights if the crown required them against an external threat. He felt no warmth in his oath, only a sense of weary obligation. Still, he sent it. Stannis's reply was terse but polite, acknowledging his brother's loyalty and welcoming further assistance. Yet no deeper amends were made. Robert remained in Storm's End, Stannis in the Red Keep, both men bound by blood yet separated by pride and differing visions of kingship. As the second year of Stannis's reign approached its close, discontent flared across the Seven Kingdoms. Tywin Lannister strengthened his grip in the Westerlands, Tyrell influence in the Reach grew, and Dorne remained aloof, waiting for an opportunity to exact justice. In the north, Ned Stark focused on his own responsibilities, wary of further Southron conflicts. The turning point came when a massive storm wreaked havoc along the coasts of the Stormlands, destroying harvests and flooding roads. Hunger threatened to sweep across Robert's domain. He requested aid from the crown to feed his people. Stannis' advisors, worried about their own supply shortages, declined to send immediate relief, citing the high demands in King's Landing. That refusal fanned the flames of resentment among Stormlords, some of whom questioned why they should remain loyal to a king who offered them nothing in times of need. Robert struggled to maintain order, cursing fate that had led him to this predicament. In desperation, Robert turned to Mace Tyrell for help, knowing the Reach had bountiful grain. Tyrell, however, exacted a price. The Stormlands would pay handsomely, and certain contested borderlands would be ceded. Robert bristled but saw no other option. Starvation was no joke, and he relented. Caravans of grain arrived from the Reach, and the immediate crisis passed. Yet this arrangement rankled the Stormlords, who felt their lord had been forced into an unworthy submission. Whispers circulated that if Robert had been king, no one would dare hold the Stormlands hostage over a few wagons of grey. Cloaked figures, possibly agents of Tywin Lannister, stoked these resentments, hinting that the king was too weak to protect his own brother, let alone the entire realm. Rumors spread that Tywin might even support Robert if he chose to overthrow Stannis. Robert crushed such talk whenever he heard it, threatening to break skulls with his hammer if anyone suggested treason against his own blood. But words were like wildfire in a dry forest, and it became impossible to stamp out every spark. Reluctantly, Robert realized that his refusal of the crown did not grant him freedom from its consequences. Torn by guilt and anger, Robert rode again to King's Landing. This time, he demanded a private audience with Stannis in the very solar where the two had once planned battles. He accused the king of abandoning the Stormlands and reminded him of their bond as brothers. Stannis, fatigued by endless challenges, retorted that a king must balance the needs of the realm, not just one region. Their voices rose until they nearly shouted at each other. The conversation ended in a strained silence, neither willing to yield. Robert left the Red Keep with thunder in his heart. Outside, in the courtyard, he encountered Tywin Lannister, who offered a courteous bow. Tywin began speaking of the realm's future, implying that Robert's leadership might be required to stabilize the kingdom if Stannis proved too intractable. Robert glared, refusing to play the lion's game. Tywin's thin smile suggested he had expected such a response. "If you ever change your mind," the Lord of Casterly Rock said smoothly, "you may find friends where you did not expect them." Robert spat on the ground, mounting his horse. He could almost smell the steel trap beneath Tywin's polite words. A new threat emerged that winter. A wave of Ironborn raids struck along the western coasts, with Victarion Greyjoy rumored to lead a fleet of longships. Towns in the Reach and the Westerlands were sacked, gold and supplies stolen. King Stannis called for a united naval response. Tywin Lannister offered to defend his own coasts but refused to coordinate with the royal fleet. Mace Tyrell demanded that Stannis repay earlier obligations before sending ships. The disunity emboldened the Ironborn, who harried coastal villages for months. Ravaged peasants cursed King Stannis for failing to protect them, Robert Baratheon for refusing the crown, and every lord who put gold above duty. Overwhelmed, Stannis called for an emergency summit in King's Landing to address the Ironborn crisis. Robert attended reluctantly, along with Tywin, Mace, and envoys from other major houses. The discussions were rife with mutual blame. Tywin suggested the Stormlands and the Reach form a combined fleet, financed by their own coffers, while the Crown's resources focused on the Crownlands. Mace Tyrell demanded that the Lannisters assist financially if they wanted the Reach's ships to leave home waters. Robert, disgusted by the quarreling, finally roared that the realm was about to be overrun by seaborne pillagers while they squabbled like children over coin. Stannis, acknowledging his brother's outburst, asked if Robert would lead the fleet against the Ironborn. The court fell silent. Robert stared at Stannis, seeing a glimmer of desperation in the king's eyes. He knew that if he took command, the realm might rally. Men still remembered him as the victor of the Trident. Perhaps the Ironborn would be intimidated. In that moment, Robert felt the old fire of battle flare within him. After a lengthy pause, he agreed, on the condition that all houses supply ships or suffer the crown's wrath. Tywin's lips thinned. Mace Tyrell raised an eyebrow. Stannis publicly assented to these terms. A hastily assembled fleet gathered in the waters off the coast near Blackwater Bay. Stannis gave Robert command, albeit with reservations. Ships bearing the sunflowers of the Tyrells and the golden lions of the Lannisters sailed side by side with Baratheon galleys. Tension was thick among the crews, but the Ironborn threat loomed larger. With a sense of déjà vu, Robert donned armor, strapped his old warhammer to his side, and sailed forth. The campaign against the Ironborn was brutal but effective. Robert's ferocity in naval skirmishes surprised even hardened sailors. Victarion Greyjoy was forced to retreat deeper into the islands. When the Ironborn offered terms, Robert refused to negotiate until they withdrew entirely from the mainland coasts. They grudgingly agreed, but everyone knew it was a temporary peace. Nonetheless, the immediate danger subsided. Upon returning to King's Landing, Robert found the city celebrating his victory. Minstrels sang new ballads of the Stormlord's might, praising him as a savior. Stannis held a feast in the Red Keep. Robert attended out of obligation. The banquet was grand, though Stannis maintained his usual reserve. Lords toasted Robert's name. Tywin gave a polite nod, acknowledging that the Stormlord had succeeded where mere diplomacy had failed. Eddard Stark, who had come down for the feast, privately confided that many in the realm now looked to Robert as the true source of leadership. King Stannis, though legitimate, lacked the adoration that Robert commanded simply by being himself. Ned watched Robert's expression, noticing the mix of pride and resentment. Robert asked if Ned believed he should regret walking away from the throne. Ned answered that regrets were easy to embrace, but life did not grant second chances without a heavy cost. Robert drank deeply, muttering that the cost might be paid in war and strife, and he hoped the realm was strong enough to bear it. Word came that Viserys Targaryen had wedded his sister to Khal Drogo, gaining a fearsome Dothraki host. Stannis weighed the news carefully, dispatching spies across the narrow sea. Many lords dismissed the Dothraki as barbarians who feared water, but Stannis refused complacency. He ordered improvements to coastal defenses. Gold was needed for these projects, and Tywin Lannister saw an opportunity to levy interest-bearing loans to the crown. Mace Tyrell also bargained, offering cheaper grain shipments to King's Landing if the king granted certain privileges to the Reach. Reluctantly, Stannis agreed, tying the realm further into the web spun by its great houses. Meanwhile, in the Stormlands, the memory of Robert's naval triumph bolstered his standing among local lords. They saw him as their true leader, an embodiment of courage and success. Talk circulated that if King Stannis proved too rigid, Robert might one day replace him. Robert tried to quash such rumors, but they persisted like weeds. Even some knights and bannermen openly wondered whether the Stormlord should be the Storm King in truth. Robert refused to be manipulated, proclaiming loyalty to his brother. Yet privately, he wrestled with the notion that he might be forced to become something he did not wish to be. More skirmishes erupted in the Westerlands, as renegade sellswords roamed unchecked. Stannis demanded Tywin handle it, but Tywin complained of insufficient resources. Tensions rose. Mace Tyrell began massing forces near the disputed borders, using the chaos to extend influence. Dorne continued to wait, content to see the other great houses exhaust themselves. Whispers of a second rebellion grew. King Stannis, pressed from all sides, clung fiercely to the letter of the law, punishing minor infractions and ignoring the deeper resentments fueling unrest. Some in the royal court quietly believed he was too brittle a ruler for a realm so fractured. Robert, torn by conflicting loyalties, traveled the Stormlands, forging stronger ties with local lords, ensuring they felt valued and protected. He poured gold into building watchtowers, training archers, and maintaining roads. The small folk appreciated his direct involvement, his willingness to drink with them in local inns and join hunts in their forests. If they thought him a king in everything but name, he did not encourage it, but he did not entirely dissuade it either. Pride flickered within him whenever people cheered his name, a pride that wrestled with guilt over the chaos he might have prevented had he taken the throne. A series of swift, violent raids in the Riverlands marked another challenge to royal authority. The suspected culprits were mercenaries hired by lesser lords who refused to bow to King Stannis' taxation. The king commanded Lord Tully to restore order, but the Tully forces were spread thin. Ned Stark sent a contingent from the north to help, guided by duty and friendship. Even Robert sent a token force, though he seethed that the realm continued to bleed. Tywin Lannister offered no help, claiming the Riverlands were not his responsibility. The rifts widened, and Stannis' hold on peace grew tenuous. At length, Doran Martell decided the time was right to press for justice. He traveled to King's Landing in person, demanding the king address the crimes committed against Elia Martell and her children. Stannis, upholding his principles, summoned the mountain that rides to stand trial, but Gregor Clegane had vanished, possibly sheltered by lords in the Westerlands. Tywin professed ignorance. Doran, unsatisfied, threatened to withdraw from the alliance, but Stannis cajoled him with promises of a renewed search. Yet Dorne's patience wore thin. Rumors spread that the Martells would consider an alliance with anyone who pledged to punish Elia's killers. That anyone might be a Targaryen or a rebellious Baratheon. Upon hearing Dorne's frustration, Robert cursed the realm's endless cycle of vengeance and retribution. He rode to King's Landing again, determined to speak with Doran Martell directly. He found the Prince of Dorne in a private chamber, reading a book of Dornish history. Robert attempted to reason, pointing out that another war would only cause more suffering. Doran listened calmly, acknowledging Robert's sincerity. Yet he insisted that without justice, the dead could never rest, and House Martell would never forget. Robert left with a heavier heart, fully realizing the deep wounds that festered beneath the realm's fragile peace. Winter approached, snow falling in the north, chill winds sweeping down to the Crownlands. Travel became difficult and supplies ran short. King Stannis' edicts to stockpile grain caused friction in the Reach. Mace Tyrell demanded favorable trade agreements in return. Tywin Lannister hoarded gold, anticipating a rise in food prices that would enrich his coffers. Robert, struggling to feed the Stormlands, again had to negotiate from a position of weakness, as storms battered his coasts. Over mugs of sour ale, he admitted to Ned that if another rebellion or major invasion came, the realm might shatter. Yet, in the face of adversity, Stannis pressed on. He organized the first royal tourney of his reign, hoping to foster goodwill and unity among the feuding houses. Knights from across Westeros traveled to King's Landing to compete. Though smaller than tournaments under previous kings, it offered a glimmer of camaraderie. Robert arrived, initially disinterested in sport, but the clash of lances and the roars of the crowd stirred old passions. He entered the melee, hammer in hand, and won decisively, reminding everyone why he had been the hero of the rebellion. The cheers for him overshadowed the polite applause for King Stannis. That night, after the tourney festivities, a group of lords cornered Robert in a lavish tent, urging him to challenge Stannis for the throne. They spoke of the realm's need for a more beloved ruler, one who could rally hearts. Robert, incensed, threatened to break their skulls if they spoke treason in his presence again. But their words planted seeds of doubt. His name alone had ended the Ironborn threat. He commanded a loyalty Stannis might never achieve. Would it not be better for Westeros if Robert Baratheon was king? He drank heavily, trying to drown the question. At the feast, Stannis recognized Robert's victory with a formal nod. Tywin Lannister and Mace Tyrell watched the brothers with calculating expressions. Doran Martell remained distant, conversing quietly with the Red Viper, Oberyn Martell, who had accompanied him. Ned Stark sat near Robert, both men uneasy about the undercurrents swirling in the hall. The Queen, a woman of noble but lesser lineage who had married Stannis after he rejected Tyrell and Lannister proposals, wore a strained smile. The feast's music and laughter could not mask the tension that coiled like a snake around each table. In the morning, Ned found Robert in a side courtyard, hunched over, nursing a hangover and a sullen mood. Robert confessed that he feared the realm would fall apart under Stannis. Yet he would not betray his brother. Ned placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, reminding him that leadership could take many forms. The realm might yet survive if men of honor stood behind the king. Robert let out a bitter laugh, remarking that too many men of honor were ready to plunge a knife in someone's back. Still, he resolved to do what he could, from Storm's End, to keep the kingdom from imploding. When the final day of the tourney arrived, Robert departed early, not wanting to linger. He passed the Iron Throne on his way out, pausing to regard its twisted swords. It looked no less menacing than before, a seat born of fire and blood. The memory of that day he refused it flickered in his mind, but he felt no urge to sit upon it. He left the Red Keep behind, returning to Storm's End, to the fierce storms that matched the turmoil in his heart. The realm would have its king in Stannis Baratheon, and Robert would remain the Stormlord, a legend of might-have-beens. More years went by. The Targaryen threat across the sea ebbed and flowed with rumors of dragons, Dothraki hordes, and golden knights. King Stannis solidified his rule in some respects, enforcing strict justice and filling the coffers by cutting down on corruption. Yet he never gained the love of the people. Tywin Lannister consolidated power in the Westerlands, forging alliances through marriage. Mace Tyrell expanded trade routes. Doran Martell nurtured the memory of Elia and demanded justice in subtle ways. Eddard Stark governed the North, keeping it mostly peaceful despite the harsh winters. Through it all, Robert Baratheon watched and waited. He grew older, the lines on his face deepening. Scars from old battles ached in cold weather. He took a wife from among the Stormland nobles, fathering children who inherited his boisterous spirit. With them, he laughed often, teaching them to ride and fight, telling them stories of a war that changed the realm. But at night, he still dreamed of Lyanna, and sometimes he woke with tears in his eyes, recalling the promises he had failed to keep. Would she have wanted him to be king? He did not know. Part of him was glad he had never found out. On a distant morning, King Stannis called his banners to march north, for reports claimed that wildlings were amassing beyond the wall. The Night's Watch was under strength, and winter's teeth grew sharper. Stannis sought to defend the realm, showing a glimmer of the old sense of duty that had carried him through the siege of Storm's End. Robert chose to honor the call, leading a contingent of Stormland knights. He rode north, side by side with Ned Stark for a time, remembering the younger days when they had marched together against the Mad King's forces. Nostalgia mingled with apprehension. Arriving at the wall, Robert gazed upon the massive structure of ice and rock, thinking of how small the squabbles of kings and lords seemed next to the mysteries beyond. The Night's Watch welcomed any aid. Stannis, grim and determined, set up a command post at Castle Black. The wildlings were numerous, but they lacked discipline. Robert took to the field with a roar, hammer swinging, scattering foes like leaves in a gale. Stannis fought with equal fervor, overshadowed by no one. For a time, the Baratheon brothers stood united in purpose, defending the kingdom from a threat older than crowns. When the wildlings were pushed back, many surrendered, seeking refuge from the deadly winter. King Stannis's mercy was tempered by law. Robert argued for lenience, a rare role reversal for the brothers, but Stannis insisted that criminals among them must face justice. Eventually, a compromise was reached, with families spared while proven raiders were punished. The Night's Watch rebuilt its ranks with volunteers among the wildlings, forging an uneasy truce. That night, by a roaring fire in the common hall, Robert and Stannis shared a cup of ale. They did not speak of the crown or the realm's troubles, only of the day's battles and the old memories of Storm's End. In that moment, they almost felt like brothers again. Returning south, both men found a realm still churning with political intrigues. Tywin's maneuverings, Tyrell's expansions, Martell's thirst for long-delayed justice, and Tully's vigilance in the Riverlands all remained. Yet for all the struggles, peace held, if only by a thread. Over the years, the name of King Stannis earned grudging respect, if not love. He kept the realm from fracturing entirely, just as Robert had once kept it from continuing under Targaryen tyranny. People spoke of the Baratheon brothers as two halves of a storm, one fierce and beloved, the other stern and unyielding. Neither alone could have won the rebellion or maintained the realm's shaky unity. In the end, Robert Baratheon lived out his days as Lord of Storm's End. He presided over banquets, tournaments, and alliances that kept the Stormlands secure. He mentored his children, teaching them to be proud and strong. From time to time, he traveled to King's Landing, paying homage to his brother the king with a strained but enduring loyalty. The realm never quite forgot that he had once held victory in his hands and let it slip away, choosing a smaller crown of duty and memory over the cold metal that rested on Stannis' brow. When Robert died in his bed many years later, surrounded by family, the Stormlands rang with mourning. Messengers carried the news across Westeros. Old warriors recalled the daring youth who had shattered Rhaegar Targaryen's breastplate at the Trident, who had roared victory in the face of impossible odds. They told stories of the day he refused the crown, walking away from destiny. Some called him foolish, others called him noble. In King's Landing, Stannis wept in private, though none saw tears on the king's face. He decreed a week of mourning. Bells tolled from the Great September, echoing across the city. The man who might have been king was gone, leaving behind a realm that had long been shaped by his fateful choice. Yet Westeros endured, as it always did through storms and strife. The Iron Throne remained, cold and cruel, its occupant ever tested by lords and wars and whispered secrets. And in the winds that howled around Storm's End, some swore they heard Robert Baratheon's laughter, a thunderous, defiant roar that mingled with the crashing waves, forever reminding the realm that one man's refusal could change the course of history. A crown had been set aside, and in doing so, he had forged a path of his own, for better or for worse, choosing the walls of Storm's End over the shards of melted swords. And there his spirit remained, unconquered by crowns or ghosts.